I fed a snake a rat one time. It's pretty good.
Wait, was this?
I temporarily had a snake. I had an ex-girlfriend who one thing led to another, and I had a snake for like a month.
Nice.
It was pretty nice. I enjoyed it.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. I am your host today, and as always, I'm joined by our co-host, Scott Melson. Hello, Scott.
What's up, man?
How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm excellent. Happy
Good.
Friday today. Normally we record on Thursdays.
Yes, but I'm glad it's Friday. It needs to be Friday.
It's a weird week.
Yeah.
Also in studio with us today is Trace Savage. Thanks for joining us, Trace.
Thanks for having me. I've long wanted to be on your podcast, and this is hopefully going to be a good maiden voyage.
I hope so. And you have a podcast as well.
Yeah, so we do a podcast with FKG Consulting called How We Got Here. It's on Podbean and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. We kind of try to look back at maybe the historical background on certain issues that are facing Oklahoma politically, and then kind of go from a point in time to the present. And sometimes that works, and sometimes we just get into long conversations.
I will say I listen to it each week, and it's very enjoyable and informative. I appreciate it. I think that our podcast complement one another nicely.
Yeah,
Agreed.
absolutely. I'm glad I didn't bring any facts here with me to this one, so I thought I would just be here.
Just going to wing it. This is how we do it every week.
Trace, you're also the editor-in-chief of NonDoc, which I just threw out there because for regular listeners will know we reference NonDoc almost every week as a kind of go-to source for information about what's happening in Oklahoma.
We appreciate that. Yeah, nondoc.com. We're on all of our social media. I'll plug our Instagram because we're trying to up our Insta followers, get our picture game on point. But yeah, we try to be a responsible public forum for news and commentary. And we've had the pleasure of working with you guys with Let's Fix This on a couple different deals. And I think that's what we're going to jump into today.
That's right. So a couple of quick announcements.
Programming notes.
First of all, and this is maybe on a personal note for all three of us, is that this morning we all woke up to the news that Anthony Bourdain had taken his own life. And I know for a lot of people, way more people than I realized, he's had a major impact, I think, on our generation. And and on the heels of Kate Spade taking her life last week, the issue of suicide has been thrust into the national attention in a way that we haven't seen in a while. And so as Scott and I prepared for today, we really wanted to put out there that if you or someone you know is struggling with depression, if you're contemplating suicide, if you've anything in that realm, we encourage you strongly to reach out to loved ones, to us. I'm a licensed professional counselor. This is actually my field of study and expertise. Trace, you're a mental health first aid instructor.
Yes, yeah. No, I think you make a really good point, Andy. And it's I think there's a lot of misconceptions. If we can say very quickly, the stigma around mental health is one of the biggest barriers for people to get help. But also, to dive deeper on that stigma, a lot of people don't understand or don't recognize or don't believe that recovery is possible, and not only possible but likely, actually. And so, I think we can all do a better job of sort of preaching that hope to folks who may be dealing with something, because a depressive condition, suicidality in and of itself is not a mental illness. It is a symptom of various mental illnesses, whether it's depression, substance use disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anything you could think of in that regard. And so it's episodic. Yeah. And so somebody may go to bed at 10 o'clock tonight feeling very suicidal, and then wake up the next morning and think, I don't feel that way now. What? That's very weird. So people don't want to talk about it a lot. So I know you guys know the answer to this. The only proven way to prevent suicide is to ask the question. Yeah. And that's sometimes counterintuitive. So, there's a lot of great resources out there. 1-800-273-TALK is the National Suicide Hotline. And I personally like psychologytoday.com. I'm sure if you go on there, you'd be able to search and you would find Andy or many other licensed therapists who it shows where they are located, what insurances they take, what they specialize in, a photo of them. And then two other things I would say is one, sometimes people have shame. Sometimes people say, well, I feel weird. I would prefer to talk to a woman, or I would prefer to talk to a man. Yeah. And they feel this sort of shame, right? That like I shouldn't, that's awkward. Or maybe it's a person of color saying, well, I would like to talk to a person of color, and they feel weird about it. And there really shouldn't be any shame in that regard, right? Like you may feel more comfortable talking to one gender or another. The other thing with that is that a lot of times people will say, well, I went to a counselor a few years ago and I just didn't really like him, and that becomes sort of a tagline to why I'm not going to go seek out another counselor. Right. And with any profession, there's folks that work well with you and folks that don't. And so I would encourage people to maybe look for all their options, because professional help, when it's found and when it's done well, it is really the best strategy for getting past any of these conditions that maybe involve suicidality.
That's right. Yeah. I definitely agree. I do want to reiterate the phone number that Trace just rattled off for the National Suicide Hotline: 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, I agree with everything you guys have said. I want to throw out something to friends and family members of people who may struggle with this. I think one of the reasons that suicide has become such an epidemic, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you did, you saw the CDC came out with a report this week that suicide has gone up by 25% since 1990. It affects men, women, children, adults, young, old, elderly. There's no demographic that is immune from this. And I think one of the reasons that it has become so such something we're struggling with as a society is, one, the stigma that Trace mentioned, that people don't want to talk about it. But I think there are times when it is mentioned that we as friends or colleagues or coworkers or whoever, don't take it as seriously as we should. When someone says that they're thinking about harming themselves, particularly if they're thinking about taking their own life, you should think of that person the same way that you would think of someone who's clutching the left side of their chest and saying, I have chest pain, right? Like, that person may not be having a heart attack. Their life may not be in imminent danger, but they have a symptom that means it could be. And that's the level of seriousness that we need to approach this with. So if you have these feelings, please reach out to someone, reach out to family, reach out to a friend, reach out to your doctor, and reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. If you are a friend or family member that someone comes to with this, please don't dismiss it. Please don't say, oh no, you're going to be fine. Please don't take it as, someone being dramatic. Take it as the cry for help that it is, and get that person to someone who can help see them through that episode.
Yeah, right. and we don't want to be mad at somebody.
Correct.
Right. I mean, even if it is somebody that we're close to, it's really hard not to take it personally, and to say, don't you know what that would do to me, or don't you know? But in reality, suicidality is a symptom of somebody who's ill, and we wouldn't have any negative connotation towards somebody who had a breathing problem or a heart problem or anything like that. So I think that's part of it too. And then the last thing I'll add is that I think this next week is really heightened risk, because there is what's called contagion, and you have a couple high-profile people who complete suicide, and for people who are sick and maybe having that affect their thinking, their behavior, their thinking, their emotional state are all kind of affected by the mental health issue they're having. They may see that, and that could be another reason for them to attempt something. So, I think over the next week, it's really important to keep an eye out, because if this is going to be a national conversation, it can be very good, but it can also result in more people maybe attempting.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, now that's over.
That's right. Let's take. So we're going to do two more announcements. and then we'll get into the topic of the day. So the two announcements are: one is that next Friday, June 15th at 6 p.m., we're going to have a debate among the Democrat candidates for Labor Commissioner. It's a statewide elected office. It's going to be, as I said, next Friday, the 15th at 6 p.m. at Trolley Stop Record Shop over on Classen. Trace,
On Penn.
Penn.
On
That's
Penn.
right. I'm sorry.
They moved, and they're in the old Penn Theater, which is at 1212 North Penn. It's just across the street from Nick's, more or less. And
If you know where current studio is, it's kind of next door-ish.
and it's a cool little venue, and we're excited to do that. I'll be moderating, and we'll work with journalists to have questions for the two candidates, Fred Durrell of Broken Arrow and Sam Massoum of Tulsa. And we're excited to be able to put that on with Let's Fix This and a couple of our partner groups, Women Lead Oklahoma and Generation Citizen. And then I guess the next announcement
for it.
is that after that, on Saturday, June 23rd at 2 p.m. at the Tower Theater on Northwest 23rd Street in Oklahoma City, we are having a primary debate among the Republican candidates for Attorney General in the state of Oklahoma. Mike Hunter, who's the current Attorney General, who was appointed to that position in 2017, and then Gentner Drummond is an attorney from the northern part of the state, Pawhuska area, I believe. And then Angela Bonilla is a public defender from, I believe, the Tulsa area. And all three of those candidates are confirmed to be there at 2 o'clock on Saturday, June 23rd. So there's a lot going on that week. It's Pride Weekend and other things, but it'll be a good chance for people to hear from the candidates in what is a contentious GOP primary for Attorney General, a very important job. And we're, very thrilled to have been able to find a date, any date, that those candidates would do a debate.
It's tough to get candidates. They've got busy schedules, especially on weekends, because they're out knocking doors and doing other events. And so this is a big deal. This is a big race, and you don't often get to see Attorney General debates. And Trace, you and I have said that we believe candidates should be required to stand on stage and face one another and face a bunch of people and be held accountable for their positions and answer questions and have that kind of public discourse. I think that's something that has fallen to the wayside, and I'm happy that we're doing it.
Totally agree. I also just feel it needs to be said, if you're listening to this and you're a supporter of Gentner Drummond and you haven't made a sign that says "Get on the Gentner," you're failing at life. Like you're doing it wrong.
Now, is Drummond, isn't the name of a city, a town in Oklahoma as well? Is there a Drummond?
Yes, there is a Drummond.
I feel like that's the most Oklahoma weather named.
Yes.
That's pretty good.
It was good.
I'm just saying, like, your campaign slogan should be "Get on the Gentner."
If his middle name is Val, like Gentner Val Drummond,
right?
Yeah.
That would be pretty good. No, all jokes aside, you're exactly right. I mean, I think it was August of last year that in partnership between NonDoc, Let's Fix This, and a couple other groups, we hosted a debate for Oklahoma County Sheriff. Went pretty well at the Tower Theater, who's been a great partner in this as well. And going into 2018, we wanted to make an effort to have several debates for these important statewide offices. If we had the ability, we'd have 50 of them for legislative seats, Congress, for all of those sorts of things. But right now we've done one this election cycle, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. It was the Republican Labor Commissioner debate. Did that a couple days ago. And we're now proud to present a Democratic one on June 15th, and then turn our attention to the Republican Attorney General's race, June 23rd. The winner of that race will face a gentleman named Mark Miles, who's the Democrat candidate in November. So there's a lot of important races, and a lot of times these things kind of get swept under the radar, and it's just a TV ad. And as to your point, Andy, we think that candidates should have to stand out in front of the public and answer some questions. And we're not going to go, attack them, but we do want to ask them some tough questions and make them, say what they think to the public.
Well, I think, so many people you get to the ballot box and you don't know who these people are on the ballot that you're looking at. And we're trying to shine a little light on that and help people get to know them in a personal way. I wish we could do it with judges. That's a much more difficult thing. OK Policy has a great kind of overview of why the judicial races matter and kind of what each of the different district judges and whatever the things are, kind of what they do, because that's something that I admit I haven't finished reading it. I don't know all the answers yet.
Debates are great too, because I think that, you can look at these, and we'll talk about this, I think, in the context of this week's labor commissioner debate, but you look at the candidates on paper, and sometimes it can be kind of hard to delineate differences, right? Particularly when you're talking about a primary where they're running for a party nomination. But when you can get them on stage, sometimes you can get a chance to compare and contrast in a way that, one, I know for me, kind of sticks with me more than it does if I just kind of compare their websites or read their position statements. But two, there's, I think, easy to kind of see more subtle differences that may not come out in campaign literature or prepared ads. So I think the more I'm definitely more debates are better.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because if you look back 60 years, 80 years, candidates had to go everywhere, and they were often together, and they were invited to places together to talk, or one right after the other.
Yeah.
And now they can, largely, if nobody forces their hand, they can just spend money on advertisements and not be forced to do that. And I think, if NonDoc started in 2015, and that was, something we've tried to do, right, is that left to their own devices, traditional media in our community have long not forced the issue. I remember hearing from campaigns who said, well, nobody will step up and sponsor it. And so I think that you look at, citizenship groups like Let's Fix This, Generation Citizen, Women Lead, Oklahoma. I'm not sure any of those groups existed 5 years ago, right? Nope. So, I think you've seen an uptick in that, and then hopefully, in our job in media is to be able to there and be fair, and that's kind of the goal in that regard.
Shall we get to it?
We shall. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss the events of this week, namely the debate between the Republican candidates for labor commissioner.
It was the only event.
That's true. We're going to talk about it. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Thanks. I feel like my mic is just maxed out today. I'm trying to adjust it. We had a lot of audio issues. If you're listening to this and it sounds like crap, I apologize. My computer, for no reason, would not recognize microphones this week.
Yeah, and this isn't my podcast, so I don't really feel bad.
Trace is off the hook.
Yeah, I'm off the hook.
Scott got his
just here,
his out, and was ready to go, and then
5 bottles of whiskey in front of me. Is that
Friday.
Okay to talk about? Is that?
Oh yeah, dude.
Oh, okay.
They know.
Most people know.
Let's fix this drink.
Yeah,
that's right.
They know.
Well, and
you guys could have a cocktail hour.
Well,
as a
we've
fundraiser. I mean, I know you had it, but
Capital
like,
Crawls.
you were there.
I know.
We've done it at times or two.
That's debatable. That's debatable. I remember standing out in the Paseo on the corner of a street with a high-level Politico chain smoking cigarettes. Not me, he was. After one of your events, so that
really?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Interesting. I'm curious to find out who that was.
I'm not going to say it on
the air.
Off
the air.
All right, so let's jump into it. So this week on Wednesday night, we had, as we just mentioned, a debate among the Republican candidates for labor commissioner. It was hosted by NonDoc and us and Women Lead and Generation Citizen and the Tower Theater with some great sponsors. It was really well attended. I was impressed for a Wednesday night.
A lot of people there. A lot of the candidates, or two of the candidates, I would say at least, brought really strong contingents of support with them, which you would expect. But there were a lot of people there that were just wanted to kind of hear and learn and get a sense of who these folks are and what they're about.
Yeah. We have a little recap on nondoc.com, and we're hoping to get the video done in the next few days, so people can check that out too if they missed it. The candidates were Kathy Costello, who is a businesswoman and former educator, and the wife of the late Mark Costello, who
previous labor commissioner, and then State Representative Leslie Osborne, also a businesswoman, a former state appropriations in the House anyway, chairwoman, and then Keith Swinton, who works at the
I'm just going to call it the Postal Training Center down in Norman because I grew up in Norman, and that's what it'll always be to me. But I think it's the National Center for Workforce Development or something like that. But he works there, and
he also has when he introduced himself and kind of was giving his spiel about like, this is what I do. He also mentioned that he is an inventor and an entrepreneur, and I think is trying to become a member of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences.
I think he was interested in that. He's got the cowboy hat for it.
He does. And I just, to all of you out there listening, this is not important, but if any of you have time and know how to find this out, I would like to know what Keith Swinton has invented.
I think patents are public records, so we could probably fire up one of these fine computers around here, and maybe in our next break, we
because he threw that in there.
Yeah,
like, they were all kind of talking, and he was like, "I'm Keith Swinton, and I work at the training center, and I'm an inventor." And I was like, "Oh, you just don't hear that every day."
He invented I'm guessing he invented a combination hard hat cowboy hat.
Ooh,
I think that would be. And if that doesn't exist already,
if he didn't, you should.
Yeah.
We could really sell that.
We'd make a bajillion. I think it exists, but if not, we should definitely look in for it. Look into it.
You guys talk about what your thoughts were on the debate, and I'm going to Google that.
Trace is going to Google hard hat, cowboy hat.
I will. I'll kind of finish setting the stage. So it's the three candidates. The format was we had Trace here was moderating the debate with questions delivered by three local journalists. We had Aaron Brilbeck from News 9, Brianna Bailey from Tulsa. She's with Frontier. And then we had Claire Donnelly from KGOU. So they presented the questions. Trace was kind of moderating and keeping everybody on task on stage. General format, there were a few rounds of questions. Each candidate would get an opening statement, and then in each round, candidate would get a question, and the other two candidates would have an opportunity to respond and rebut with a little bit varying kind of time lengths depending on which round of questions we were in.
Right.
And tell me what you guys think, if this is too kind of like in the weeds. To me, there's kind of a couple ways to look at this in terms of analysis, I guess. One is certainly like kind of the substance and the merits of like what did they say? In answer to how did they answer the question on policy and substance? But then I think the other kind of thing is what's the politics of their answer? You know what I mean? Like, because this is it's political, right? Like they're running for the Republican nomination for labor commissioner. So I think there's a question of what's the policy, but then there's a question of how does that policy play with the people, specifically registered Republicans in Oklahoma, who are going to be voting on these candidates.
Yeah. Maybe before we get into the specifics of their responses, Trace, can you tell us a little bit about what the labor commissioner does?
Sure. Well, the labor commissioner for $22.77 each can buy a polyethylene hard hat cowboy hat on gamut.com, GAMUT.com. So with that said, let's talk about what the labor commissioner does. The labor commissioner functionally is the head of the Department of Labor, which covers a lot of things, from regulation of everything from boilers to asbestos abatement to elevator inspections to amusement ride inspections, but also deals with disputes over payment, labor disputes. If let's say you've left a job and your final paycheck, there's a dispute over that paycheck, you're not getting it, you can go file at the Labor Department to have them help mediate and presumably get you that pay. And a lot of people I actually, in just the past couple of days after the debate, have had multiple people say, hey, you know what, I worked, I did that, I had to do that, and then the Labor Department really helped me out. So that's one thing they do. They also they deal with a lot of occupational licensure, and then we'll probably sort of get into that when we talk about the specific questions, because the current commissioner of labor, Melissa Houston, who is a friend of mine, a good dancer, by the way, just if it's out there. Her husband, we're old friends, and anyway, he can flip someone over his arm,
like a swing dance,
like a total flip. He flipped an ex-girlfriend of mine over in my living room. The whole thing was frightening to watch, but Anyway, but no, they're great people, and the current she was put as the head of a occupational licensure task force in 2016, and that task force was trying to get a handle on the whole issue of licensure. So you gentlemen are both licensed.
Right.
I think I'm the only one that's not licensed or bonded. But you guys have your own boards that you go to, and they're under their own places, and some of them have their own buildings, and some of them have their own funds that's just swept by the legislature.
Yeah. So this is like, just so everybody's kind of clear what Trace is talking about. This is like my license to like my medical license is subject to the authority of the Oklahoma Board of Medical Licensure and Supervision. That's who grants my license. That's who I have to reapply for my license with every year and renew. There's a similar board like for nursing. There's the board. What's the
behavioral health?
Behavioral health board. And so
I was getting my CEUs this morning.
Yeah.
Because I have to renew mine this month.
So for the most part, if you have an occupation in Oklahoma that requires a license of some kind, there is probably a board or commission. Not all of them, but there are many boards and commissions that administer those.
And when you say many, we mean
Hundreds.
many.
Yes,
Like there are bananas numbers of licensing boards out there.
But
And hair braiding is one.
Right. Well, you have esthetician. You have alarm and locksmiths board is really one of the big ones that's under the Department of Labor, and so you have some very specific duties within the Department of Labor and under the Commissioner of Labor's jurisdiction. And so that was sort of the second round of our questions, and we kind of did the longer answers in there. But then you also have that position as sort of a bully pulpit, if you will, that is afforded an opportunity to kind of push for policy ideas. And so I think maybe that's a good place to start, because that was kind of our first. That was sort of one of our categories, and I think Kathy Costello, the big takeaway was that she's very big of pushing mental health care, which is sort of convenient that we maybe started talking about this. And she talked a lot and has talked a lot throughout the campaign trail. I don't think it was a surprise to anybody that she spoke a lot on the need for mental health to be considered a workforce issue as well, because it disrupts businesses, it disrupts into families, it affects an individual's ability to do their best, their behavior, their emotional state, their thinking. That's sort of the acronym I like to use. And so she mentioned this in terms of how do we improve mental health care access. Now, I thought it was interesting that if you're going to talk a lot about that, if that's going to be maybe your main thing, I didn't hear the acronym EAP or the bigger phrase Employment Assistance Program.
Right.
I didn't hear that said once.
No.
Nor did we hear ODMH SAS.
Right, and that's one of the. So Andy and I were talking kind of after the debate, and that's one of the things that I know you were struck by, Andy, was that Ms. Costello was talking about, mental health is kind of one of the main issues that she would be tasked, that she would want to pursue as labor commissioner. But you brought up the point that there's literally a whole government agency in Oklahoma that does that, Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, an agency that has been, I think many folks would say, sorely lacking in funding. And so there's a question, I think a legitimate question comes up that says, is that really the purview of the labor commissioner to be so interested in mental health when there's another government agency that does that? And I think that's a great point, but I think that there's also, I think that you can come back and say, according to the Oklahoma State Constitution and Title 40, which outlines what the labor commissioner does, the labor commissioner is supposed to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of the wage earners of the state. And so I think her position is that trying to work on mental health would fall within that kind of legal obligation of the labor commissioner.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it would be hard to argue otherwise. Again, I mean, we talked about a bully pulpit. The idea is that this is a position that is elected by the people, and I should say one of the reasons we wanted to have a debate for this is because a lot of people don't have any idea what the heck they do, know? And so I think that I don't know anybody who would really argue that a labor commissioner wouldn't have the authority to go out and have some creative programs and efforts to increase mental health access or mental health awareness.
Sure.
break down the stigma that we
Right.
talked about. And certainly, we'd be remiss not to mention that obviously Ms. Costello has, firsthand knowledge of that.
Yeah.
Her one of her sons has a psychosis inducing condition.
Yeah.
And is going to be in state custody for a long time because he unfortunately killed her husband and his father. So she certainly understands this as well as, if not, better than most people, right? So, but at the same time, I think that, that's where you get into this political thing, right? Like, it's one thing to stand up there and talk about mental health, but from because I think all three of us, certainly have mental health in our work, one way or the other. I didn't hear a specific idea. I didn't
Correct.
I didn't hear, okay, only 20% of Oklahoma employers with 10 or more people have an EAP right now.
Totally
so
agree.
we're going to set a goal that in the end of my first year we're up to 20% or 50%. And and some of that is artful politicking as well too. I mean, but I didn't know exactly what. Now I will say she did say she was going to set up the Costello Commission on mental health, but I think that was maybe about as specific
kind of a task force thing. Yeah, we talked about that afterwards, and when I told her I was an LPC, she was like, "Oh, great. Well, maybe Lord willing, if I'm elected, you could serve on that." I was like, "Well, we can cross that bridge when we come to it." But I appreciate anybody in any position discussing the issue of mental health because that's kind of my bailiwick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was good. On the other hand, so let's kind of be fair. I think that Representative Osborne, I know in personal conversations with her, frankly, that she's also an advocate for mental health care.
Yes.
But she sort of had a little different tact, I think, in the debate. I felt like she had studied a lot of. She rattled off some statute stuff, which I think we like that, but I don't know to how much the public is just thrilled. Well, shoot, she said this statute number like she knew it on the back of her hand, so I'll vote for her. But
I think maybe what was to me what people who even people who may not follow this as closely, the thing that they were perhaps could be a little more impressed with is that not only did she know the statutes, but she made a point of saying, I wrote some of them. You know what I mean? It's not just that I know the laws that pertain to the Labor Department. It's that there's a fair number of them that I have authored while I've been in the legislature for the last 10 years. And so I know this agency in and out because I've been part of the body that oversees it for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that both, as a result, both she and Ms. Costello, both came off as pretty knowledgeable.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that they really both, seemed like they certainly have a grasp of a lot of the issues. And some of that, and this is not to toot our horn in the way we made the questions, but I think we did craft the questions in a way that no matter what the answers of the candidates were going to be, we were trying to help educate the audience and the public about what the Commissioner of Labor does, what the Department of Labor does. And I was impressed, I think, in the answers that it didn't seem like anybody was really caught off guard by that. They both of the two female candidates seemed very prepared to talk about those things. And I think there was even a little maybe debate between the two of them on like a date that something happened in the 80s or something. You know what I mean? So they both knew it so well they wanted to get in that. I think Mr. Swinton, he exhibited a knowledge base maybe more from working in a labor field.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure he exhibited as much knowledge about the maybe statutory obligations of the agency.
Yeah, I think he definitely brings kind of a different set of skills to the office, and he would say as much. I mean, when he got up to give his opening statements, he said, "Well, I've never really spoken public before. This might have been a bad idea," and and I think he won over a lot of folks, at least in heart or in spirit, because he is he's the definition of a citizen that saw a need and decided to run for office, and that as we've talked about before, takes guts, and to stand on stage with someone who's been an elected representative for a decade and someone else who has intimate knowledge of this position from her when her husband was there, that I think that takes some courage and some guts.
And I commend him for showing up. It's funny, when they got up to give their opening statements, Miss Costello, she got up and she had some notes prepared. I mean, it was clear that she had kind of a goal, like, this is what I'm gonna say. And then Mr. Swinton gave his opening statement, and I wrote down when he approached the microphone, I said, "Speaking without notes." Interesting, because that either means that he knows exactly what he wants to say and is prepared to deliver it, or it means that he's never done this before and does not really have an opening statement prepared, and we're just going to kind of see what happens. I would say it was mainly the latter. He kind of just talked to him about, I'm an average guy. I drive a Dodge, and I'm
all of his friends drive Chryslers,
right? All my friends drive Chryslers. He said.
I was so confused because I thought Chrysler owns Dodge,
right.
So I didn't know. Maybe that joke is a little dated.
Well, yeah, I think it is. I think it's like a Chevy versus Cadillac kind of debate.
But anyway, and then Representative Osborne was the last to go, and she got up, and she also didn't have notes, but having seen her speak many times, and it was clear, and that was clear on Wednesday night, she had a statement prepared, and she was ready to get up and say it.
She did say, I spoke to her briefly before the debate, and she said, I haven't done a debate like this in more than 10 years. And so even someone who's, been on the floor of the House of Representatives and
where
speaks
debate isn't
publicly.
really debate.
Well, that's true, yeah. Usually I talk at people and they're on their phone. That's what she's saying. But I think, as someone who is an experienced public speaker, that comment kind of showed that she was still at least a little bit nervous about it.
Well, and I think that's, let's go back to the broader, we're talking about the debates we're working on. We intentionally are calling them debates. We're not calling them forums. Mm-hmm. We are attempting to have candidates have a little bit of back and forth. And, I think you guys saw that myself and Aaron Brilbeck a little bit, kind of pressed the candidates a little bit and made sure they answered the questions. And that's a little different than a forum. And I do want to, maybe that's an important time to clarify that when we're doing these primary debates, right? There's a reason that there were only the 3 GOP candidates on that stage. And there's a reason there'll only be the 2 Democratic candidates on June 15th. And there's a reason there'll only been the 3 Attorney General candidates who are Republicans on the 23rd, because this is a primary election debate. A forum would be saying, well, we're going to talk about these issues and we're going to go down the line and nobody gets to really reply and everybody gets to do their thing and it's very secure and stuff like that. And, gubernatorial candidates have done 1,000 of those, so far. But the idea of a debate where you're being pressed by journalists, I think is really, really important. And so as we move forward into the runoffs, presumably for governor, for the general election, for all these things, mark it down. We're going to be trying to ensure a lot of debates. We may not get every one of them just because we all have things to do and it's hard to do. But, people need to have a debate, not just a forum.
Right. Agreed. And I think I put this on Facebook, that doing a primary debate that is just among members of one party at a time allows voters of that party to compare apples to apples more than apples to oranges, right? Or, apples to blueberries, I guess, to stick with the partisan colors. But
that sounds like something someone said on the podcast last week.
Did you say that?
Yes. I said that's why I find primaries more interesting than the general election debates, because in general election debates, particularly for, kind of higher offices, right? I think if a typical Democrat and a typical Republican running for governor in Oklahoma, I think a person in Oklahoma who is reasonably engaged could probably predict what the candidates might say on a whole host of issues, because Republicans tend to think certain ways and Democrats tend to think certain ways. But when you get candidates from the same party and stick them next to each other, they're all running ostensibly on the same general platform, right? Because they're all vying for the party's nomination. Right. So how do you differentiate yourself among other people who are kind of, as a general rule, believe the same things that you do.
Right.
To me, that's just it's just a little bit more interesting and can make for kind of a rowdier debate.
And the difference in that would be something like an open primaries or a jungle primary, which we've discussed.
Hashtag
previously.
California. Hashtag
California.
lockout.
Hashtag Louisiana. You know,
Yeah.
I was playing that Sammy Kershaw song before we started recording, and he was almost lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana in a jumble primary.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's your Sammy Kershaw fact of the day. He was running on the campaign slogan "Working Woman's Holiday," which is one of his songs you can YouTube.
This reminds me of when who's the guy that ran in Texas?
Keep Austin weird. Kinky Friedman.
Yes, Kiki Friedman with his tag. At least the one that I saw was just "Vote Kinky." Why the hell not?
Yeah, there you go. Vote Keith Swinton, I guess. Why the hell not? No, I mean, because, and I think, again, I think there are a lot of important managerial issues in that job that maybe we don't always see. Do you guys want to? Were there any questions that or answers that stood out to you?
I was going to suggest maybe just kind of briefly let's go through each one of the rounds. Kind of what was the question? What do people say? And then kind of commentary as we see fit. Does that seem reasonable?
I was on the account of time. Let's not do all the questions.
Yeah, let's do one of each.
Kind of your face.
Let's do one from each round.
Okay, also not all the questions. Maybe, yeah. Because some of them, like, question 2 is about if it should be an elected position or be appointed, and they all were like, no, it should be elected.
Well, and I thought that was really interesting. I wasn't sure that. I thought that could have gone either way, right? I thought there could have been some folks who said, you know what, we don't need to be doing this. I'm running for this seat, but I'll support making it appointed. But I thought the answer to me that stuck out there was when Keith Swinton talked about how he has a friend in Wisconsin who works in labor, and he said that that friend of his perception was that the appointed position was sort of a gift in return for somebody who was a big donor, and that in fact it meant there was no accountability. And I think Oklahoma government, I think we've seen some state agencies where there's been a lack of accountability from people who've been appointed, right? So
hashtag health.
Hashtag hashtag
tourism.
Yeah. So agriculture.
Just name all the agencies.
Well, but Oklahoma's populist roots, which this wasn't always there was a time in which this was an appointed position.
I mean, up until in terms of the history of the state, relatively recently, right? It was 60s or 70s.
Yeah,
when it became.
It was 1979 when it became less. Now I'm unclear. I think it might have been elected before. I think it might have gone back and forth a couple of times. But most recently in 1979, I think it was a state question that made it elected again. And I think that's interesting, right? Is that maybe people do have an interest in having an elected an opportunity to throw the bums out, as the phrase goes. And I think that in I guess it would have been 2010. No, wait, 2006. Lloyd Fields was the elected labor commissioner, and then in 2010 lost to Mark Costello, and in the meantime had a series of sort of public debacles with the Public Employees Association and stealing a guy's guitar or something like. I can't remember the exact specifics, but so I think that not to say that an appointed position wouldn't have been removed for that sort of behavior. I suppose there is a justification for having it elected.
Yeah, I mean, I think it struck me as just a quintessentially Oklahoman thing to say, right? Like, we are populist. We would elect the dog catcher if that was an elected position. I think there's at least the belief that if the power to choose is in the hands of the people, then even if they choose poorly or not the way I would decide, at least it wasn't just some kind of nepotism-induced appointment.
Right, which is, I think, a very noble idea. It also, though, kind of goes. I mean, and this is something, Andy, you and I have talked about before, right? Like, one of the things that irks me is when politicians say that, like, they're like their whole reason for running is like, well, we just need common sense.
It's not very
Yes,
common.
common sense. Yes, well, first of all, you can debate how common sense is, but right, like, so the Labor Department is in charge of enforcing regulations and safety and regulating occupational hazards for all of the wage earners in the state of Oklahoma. Maybe there's a common sense way to do that, but I think probably it requires a fair amount of expertise and political savvy and like managerial expertise. Like, it's not a thing that just because you are a sharp, intelligent person, that doesn't mean that you automatically possess the skill set. And there are other times where something that seems like it's common sense, right, actually, when you kind of go further, doesn't make sense
Right, so
at all.
counterintuitive, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's kind of, I guess I would push back not so much on you, but on the candidates a little bit. Not to say that this should be an appointed position, but I think you can make an argument that when a position is appointed, in theory at least, they have and this is part of the reason why we appoint judges instead of elect them, they have the independence and ability to pursue good policy without having to worry about the political ramifications.
Well, we do elect plenty of judges,
Well,
which is
right.
also awkward. It's weird,
Right.
And I think that's a whole other thing for another time. Let me say this, and maybe we can go on to the next question. There's a great John Prine song called "Common Sense," and he says, "It don't make no sense that common sense don't make no sense no more."
I love it. Okay, the next question, since apparently we can't do all the questions because somebody has to go to Dead Center.
Are you gonna? Well, I just don't want our listeners to be here all night.
Yeah, and
They can watch the video.
Yeah, they can. They can watch that.
And are you doing a blog post of this?
I
at
sure
some point?
can. Yeah,
Okay, that'd be
yeah.
tremendous.
Yeah, I can do that. So there was a question, and I don't have the exact wording of the question, but essentially it was the task force that Trace had mentioned earlier had made some recommendations about centralizing a number of boards, commissions, and agencies and kind of putting all of those under one umbrella at the Department of Labor to eliminate some of these licensure boards and committees and commissions. And the question is essentially to the candidates was, should we do that? Or should we kind of, what's the best way to approach all of these? Ms. Costello, basically, her thought was that not all licenses reflect a certain level of education, training, or certifications. And so because of that, she was in favor of kind of making licensure more centralized rather than having as many agencies and committees. Representative Osborne, she said, yes, keep the central licensing authority. However, she said, for instance, there are certain boards, and I'll just use my own profession because it's the one that I know best, the Oklahoma Board of Medical Licensure and Supervision. Representative Osborne cited that as an example, saying maybe it's best to keep licensing authority for doctors in the hands of doctors as opposed to directly in the hands of the Department of Labor. And she mentioned a Senate bill by Senators Pugh and Senator Mike Osborne that would basically take a look at all of these. Every agency that grants licenses would be reviewed every 4 years and kind of determined how, necessary it still is.
To interject real quick, did Ms. Costello also mention that there is a board for those who sell bunk beds?
Yeah, she said something about bunk beds, and I
haven't had a chance to research that.
We should look that up, and
I'll
maybe
Google
you include that in your thing.
In the blog
And
post.
Swinton he sort of threaded the needle. I don't remember exactly what he said off the top of my head, but
Well, he basically said, I don't think that centralized licensure, he didn't really address that part of the question, but there was a second part of the question that dealt with.
Let's get to the second part of that question too. I think you picked the right question of the three in that round. So on the licensure under one agency thing, I think that this is a really good example of how sometimes people will talk about the need for reforming government, and then it becomes hard, or any sort of reform, it's always somebody's gonna be mad, and especially if you are an elected person, it is harder to actually do that reform because you don't want to make the alarm and locksmith board
Right.
mad. You don't want to make everybody who's in that industry mad against you. You don't want to make the firefighters mad. You don't want to make these people mad. If you're in a appointed position,
Right.
what do you care? You're
Right.
going to do what you think is best for the state.
And the other part of that is too, or I shouldn't say the other part, something that goes along with that is a lot of these boards. I don't know about the alarm or the hairbraiding commission, but there are some of these boards where to serve on that board or commission pays like a pretty good amount of money. Like it's so there are people who sit on these boards and commissions who don't want to see that, source of revenue or that income go away.
Well, and a lot of the licenses get caught up into the board. So I mean, the Board of Medical Supervision, has a fund that their fees and penalties and these things go to, and occasionally it gets swept by the legislature, or maybe they go build a new building. And they get to do so. There's a lot of that as well. You said something interesting, and you and I might have slightly different opinions about this. Have you been to the medical licensure board?
Thankfully, not recently.
There you go. Right. You don't want to show up.
I didn't. The only time I went was when I finished medical school and then applied for my initial license. We had to go I had to go drop something off. But I have never had to appear before the medical board.
Good. Fingers crossed. Knock on wood that you don't.
That's the only time I've ever been to their building.
Yeah, there you go. But I think it's important to note that, and I think they do a pretty good job. I mean, Lyle Kelsey's a real good guy, and they've got staff that does that. And I think the staff that runs these things does really well. But I've always found those boards to, at the end of the day, they're not practicing medicine. I mean,
Right.
this does not nothing in medical school teaches you to operate an occupational licensing board or to be a member of that. And functionally, if we are talking about common sense sorts of things,
Right.
You can have a lot of common sense. Most of these boards, frankly, have a lay member. They typically have one member who's not a pharmacist or dentist or optometrist or nurse
Right.
or whatever it is. And yet the boards are, because the membership comes and goes, and most people, if you were added to this board tomorrow,
Right.
you probably wouldn't know mostly what the hell's going on for your
Right.
first 5 or 6 meetings. So they rely a lot on staff as it is anyway.
Yeah.
And yet there becomes, I think, I've personally, having worked in healthcare, there is a big argument to be made that these boards often become comical.
Sure.
I mean, I remember telling the head of the optometry board that I was hoping to help him create this new license that the legislature had instructed him to do, and I've told this story many times, and he's a nice guy. I don't think he's still the head of it, but this is damn near 10 years ago. His reaction was, "Well, I don't think we want to do that." And I was like, "Well, with all due respect, sir, you have to do that. The legislature has passed a bill directing you to do this." And he goes, "Well, I don't think we want to do that." And I said, "Well, why don't you go talk to your attorney,
Right.
and find out what your options
What your
are
recourse
here."
is, yeah.
And so I say all that where sometimes it can become protectionist.
Sure.
And so let's say I'll give you an example. The Alarm and Locksmith Board had attempted to create so some guys had created a company where they were reprogramming key fobs on cars. So if you sell your car, Andy, to Scott, and so Scott gets the car and he goes down to this company and they reprogram that car for a new key fob so that Andy's key fob doesn't work anymore, right? So these guys were all of a sudden ruled by this Alarm and Locksmith Board that they needed to pass the locksmith exam to get licensed to run their company, and
Because it's a lock,
Right.
because it's a lock,
but no key.
and
Yeah.
they couldn't pass a
Locksmith.
exam. I mean, these guys are programmers. They don't know how to open a safe from 1930,
Right.
And so, you have to have, so I think, I don't know exactly what happened, but the point is that left to their own devices, oftentimes industries and people who've been in the industry
they want
for
to
a long
protect
time
their own,
will
yeah.
protect their own,
Yeah.
right? And so the idea that the dental board or the pharmacy board or the optometry board or the medical board or the nursing board. The idea that they have the public's best interest in mind that's a great idea,
Sure.
but I'm not sure it always plays out in that realm because they're very personally invested in that area. So I think that's, to me, I think that's why it's a really interesting discussion. And nobody really got into that. Nobody wanted to go there, especially because you had a room full of firefighters and other people in labor and stuff like that. But I think that's a really interesting question.
No, I think you're right, and I think you make a great point, and certainly it's one that needs to be, I mean, I think you make a great point. I think that, and again, I can only speak to medicine because that's the only thing I deal with, but at least in that context, I don't think that necessarily you need a medical board of doctors to determine whether a person who has graduated from an accredited medical school and passed their board exams, like, that person is going to be granted a license to practice, and they should. Like, that's a straightforward decision, I think, for the most part. I wonder, though, if when it comes to professions, and I mean, again, maybe this is all professions, but I know certainly with mine, I think that where it does get a little bit trickier is I don't know that we want, when it comes to things like, when a doctor is doing something, like if a doctor is being accused of misconduct of some kind, or, practicing outside their scope, or, practicing below the standard of care. I don't know that, I think that those decisions might be more nuanced. And I think that in those cases, you do need people that are experts, like, because that does become a question of practicing medicine, right? That does become a question of, like, looking at a specific situation and saying, where does this kind of fall? Like, there aren't necessarily black and white,
no doubt
lines.
but here's the, and this is where I think this is the gray area where we're talking about is that, sure, we may definitely want a committee of professionals in that health field to be the ones making determinations of scope of practice violations or all those sorts of things. That doesn't mean that we need to have a specific paid executive staff for that committee.
That's
or
fair.
that committee needs to have its own building with its own fee structure board, and I mean, and so if we have literally hundreds of these types of situations, it also from an efficiency standpoint is that if we're the medical board or the alarm board or whatever, and we're going to go out and we're going to say, okay, we're going to try to put in a computer system that makes you be able to do all this online, right? If we have we have 10,000 people we regulate, and we have, this small agency or whatever, our purchasing power, I mean, is minuscule.
Sure.
And then we may go pick one vendor, and then another board may go pick another vendor, and then they're different things, and it's different, and they don't talk to each other.
Right.
So I think that there's that element of it too, where, if the state is trying to get to a system where in 2018 or maybe 2020 or whatever, we can access this data and we can go online and renew our licenses and do all this sort of stuff, it's obviously going to be much more difficult
to justify
to have 100 plus groups doing that as opposed to one. Now, it sounds like I'm arguing for that. I'm not necessarily arguing for it. I'm making the case for people who do believe.
You're being an independent journalist.
I'm making the case that if you go read the report that task force that we started this question about, these are the justifications that they have for a centralization of this, because it's just these old fiefdoms, and it's really hard to know what each of them is doing.
Sure.
So the second part of that question, I know we've got very little time.
How are we on time?
We'll be quick. The second part of that question was, should there be that task force said to re-examine whether felonies should prohibit people from obtaining licenses? And I thought there, everybody sort of, I think Kathy Costello mentioned, if you had a DUI, 10 years ago, or you had a felony possession of marijuana 10 years ago, you should be allowed to be a barber, all those sorts of things. Right. And I think Leslie Osborne made a really interesting point, which was that, yes, definitely we should, drug possession, we should look at that for all these sorts of things. Although, we need to be case by case, because maybe you don't want somebody who has multiple felony convictions for selling drugs to be
a pharmacist.
Yeah, a pharmacy tech. So.
And then, I think that's probably the best way to summarize that. Like, so, Miss Costello basically said, like, we need to my takeaway was we need to get away with this ban on felons, because they can't get within the skilled labor workforce, and we have all these felons that can't work, and we also have a massive shortage of skilled labor for certain positions in Oklahoma. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Representative Osborne said, yeah, I agree with that to a point, but it needs to be more nuanced, and basically you have to deal with each trade on a kind of individual,
which is
liberal.
To me, that's the point of a lot of these boards, is to review these things. I mean, I know for the counseling board, every meeting they have to review people that are applying for a new license, whatever corrective action has been taken against them.
Mr. Swinton's answer to that question was everyone deserves a second chance. And that's what he said. I do want to, before we get out of here, I know we are like right at the very end. I do think that there are a couple other things that are just worth putting out there. There was a question, one of the last questions was essentially, the Labor Department has really had a hard time struggling. Like, they've really been struggling to keep staff and train staff. And one of the questions about that was, should they have higher salaries?
And not just them, but like public employees
in general.
Right.
And I think that the reason I bring that question up is because I think that honestly, when we talk about Miss Costello and Miss Representative Osborne, this was the issue on which, to me, they had the most distinctly different answers out of any question of the night. Miss Costello basically said she took the only shot of the night. She said, "Well, maybe the House, the A and B committee, needs to appropriate them more money."
It was a very delicate shot.
It
though.
was
I had to go back and like kind of remake it for her, right? Like I was like, "Oh, Representative Osborne, this is what was said." So,
so she said that, and then. But she also said the department needs to be efficient and they need to use the resources that they have, which I don't think anyone would disagree with that. It also didn't really answer the question, like, should they have more resources? And I don't feel like we got a great answer from her. Whereas Representative Osborne, she came out and she, I think, made a passionate and very eloquent case for raising state employee pay across the board. She said, state employees in Oklahoma are about 50% of private sector equivalent, and that really makes it hard to get good people and keep good people. And it also, even though we're only paying half what the private sector does, it actually costs us way more money, because every time you let someone go or someone quits to take another job, when you rehire somebody, you have to train that person. So she had mentioned that there was a bill she ran trying to get public employee pay up to like 90%, I think, of private sector pay, and said that if we did that, even though we would pay more, we would actually save that. I mean, she said we'd save that investment in like 2 years or something, just on costs, like reduced cost of rehiring and retraining. So
I can see that. Like, I've hired 2 new staff in the past month, and I'm not exactly a public employee, but man, it just, I've pretty much had to set aside my entire schedule for like 2 weeks,
right?
A week with each person, just to get them like 30% up to speed, so that I can hand them off to someone else. And it takes I forget every time how much time and effort it takes to get someone onboarded.
Right. And I thought that was an interesting question too, because Representative Osborne specifically made the case. She said, I don't know how well this plays in a Republican primary, but this is how I feel. Like, like we need to pay our state employees more. And so I thought that was interesting.
And Swinton just said, it's good help's hard to find.
If
you don't pay them much, you can't find them.
That's why we had time for a couple extra questions, because he was very efficient with his time. He had like 2 minutes to reply, and he used about 14 seconds. So it was pretty good. Any closing?
I had 2 things. First of all, one, I Googled the bunk bed rules, and there is indeed laws. I don't know if there's a board or a license associated with bunk beds, but there are rules establishing requirements for retailers of bunk beds. in the Oklahoma Code. It's under the State Board of Health. They shall promulgate rules establishing requirements for retailers of bunk beds, which include but not limited to just two things. One, each set of bunk beds must be posted with an indelible warning which conforms to the American Society for Testing and Materials voluntary standards or U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission standards.
I've got a new regulation if any of the candidates want it.
What's that?
Each bunk bed has to come with 2 cowboy hat hard hats.
Nice. There you go. The second rule, is basically that the space. You can't sell a set of bunk beds that does not limit the space between the lower edge of the guardrail and the upper edge of the bed frame of the upper bunk to 3 1/2 inches or less.
Oh yeah, so you don't have a child's head get caught
Right.
in the.
But it's just of the 2 rules, that's one. The one's like, first of all, sell safe bunk beds. Also, be sure they're safe in this very specific way.
Right.
And it was passed in 1998.
So I want to emphasize this is not because of you, but rather while you were reading that, I fell asleep and fell out of a bunk bed. Like while you were
old big government Frank Keating up on that thing.
Right, that's right. So then maybe we'll, if you guys are okay with it, we can end with, I was just going to read my 3 tweets. I tried to summarize each of the candidates' closing statements in a single tweet, which was tough. So I may have slightly missed the point, but here we go. So Mr. Swinton went first. He basically said no, he didn't. He went second. We'll start with the first one, was Representative Osborne. She said, will workers stay in Oklahoma? Nothing changes until we have more jobs, and better educated workforce. We need to target and train high school students, not just grown-ups or adults.
Agreed.
Mr. Swinton went next, and he said, we need to teach people how to have self-respect and how to help them find what they're supposed to do so that they have some investment in self-respect in what they do. Basically, if you do what you're supposed to do, you feel good about it, you'll work harder.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that because I wrote down what you just said. Mm-hmm. I agree with your summary, but I also put an ellipses with I'm confused. Because when he said it, I was just totally... I don't understand the point that you're trying to make with regard to the labor commissioner.
That was it.
But okay, all right.
It wasn't about the position. It was about kind of what we needed to do in general. And then Ms. Costello closed us out, and she said, basically, my summary is that she started by giving the constitutional description of the labor commissioner, which Scott mentioned earlier, that shall advance opportunities for profitable employment because labor brings dignity to people. She promotes Votex, and then again mentioned the need to address mental illness in the workforce. So that's my quick and dirty summary.
And I agree. I would say, do we? There's 3 of us here. Do we have a winner? Do we want to? I don't think there's. I don't know that we can. We'll know who wins the primary, but can we say coming out of the primary, was there a person who kind of equipped, or I don't know, represented themselves best? Was there a person who? What do you think?
I think that they were all kind of unique in their own way, and I don't really know what criteria we would judge them on anyway.
Right.
There was no clear winner, no clear loser.
Sure.
I think, in my opinion, Representative Osborne and Ms. Costello seemed to present themselves in a more traditional politician way.
Right.
But I don't think that's Keith Swinton's style either. He's not a politician.
Sure.
Right? So I think it was interesting.
Yeah.
I feel more informed as a voter.
Trace?
Yeah, I thought everybody did well. I mean, it wasn't. I thought there might be a little more back and forth than there was, but overall, I think it was really focused on a lot of the details of the job, and I'm really interested to see what the Democratic candidates say on Friday, June 15th. So just a shameless plug for this event as well. Hope people come out to the Trolley Stop Record Shop, 1212 North Penn. If you have a vinyl player, bring some cash. Literally bring cash, because I don't think they take cards. But
they've got some good stuff.
They got a big selection, so that'll be good. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And then obviously also by the time this airs, we'll have announced Saturday, June 23rd. Mark it down. Mike Hunter in one corner. In the other corner, bing, bing, Angela Bonilla. And then in the third corner of this triangle, we've got Gintner, Drummond.
Dude, that's going to be a fun night. I can't wait.
I'm excited.
And by night, you mean 2 p.m. in the afternoon.
Whatever.
That's true. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, you can connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Fix This OK. Scott is at SC Melson. Andy, I'm at AndyOKC. Trace.
I am at Thrice Savage, THRICE Savage, SAVAGE, and at NonDoc Media, NONDOC Media. That's at NonDoc Media on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Thanks for having me.
Definitely worth a follow there. You can connect with us on Facebook as well. Let's Fix This OK. And our website is letsfixthisok.org. Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, non-profit organization who strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans to engage with their government. We encourage you to get involved in any way you can, specifically right now by learning about candidates and going to cast your ballot in the primary election on June 26th. Ooh, Scott, we forgot to mention, on June 26th, you and I both took off work so we can drive around and talk to voters and film ourselves in the car while we do it, right?
We are such huge nerds.
We are.
Are you getting
But it's going to be awesome.
Ooh, that sounds like a good plan, though.
We should.
We should. We will have a surprise announcement, I believe. I don't want to say it yet because it may not happen, but I think we're going to have a new merch item to announce on that day.
Stay tuned.
Drum roll, please.
All right, vote cowboy hat, hard hats, but I don't know.
That's right. Get your Let's Fix This cowboy hat, hard hat. No, that's not what it is, but that would be cool. That's definitely an idea
Love it. Yeah.
for the future.
Do they have ones that we can have like the Let's Fix This logo put on?
You can put a sticker on anything.
Wow, there it is.
There we go. Get them in red and blue. All right. Remember, everyone, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week.